I suppose for many of us, the problem of isolation is really born in the conditions of our birth, namely that our parents didn't really care, at least in a way that we could feel, so that the early childhood experience wed in time to the learning of roles which acclimate people to living with people that don't care. In time comes on a person who's had that experience in a realization as feeling that I am living and feeling within something, and that what I am does not reach through the things that I do. I have no sense that it touches anyone else, and I'm not really aware of feeling anything but myself. And what I thought I felt from another person, in retrospect, in thinking back about it, I can only now feel myself in that. And probably in particular to early love relationships that were not really connections, that I realized what I felt was my own love and not anyone else. And that feeling of isolation, of no one really caring for you, or knowing that no one understands you or has felt you, or that if they did, it was only a transient thing, and that it does not go on as a force or a factor outside your psychology, with the doubts that it leads to about the power of love, the constancy of love, and the later highly sophisticated questions about love being a wonderful experience but not reality, comprise what most of us feel maybe as the most central feeling of our life: isolation, alienation, however you want to put it, that I'm alone in the world. And nothing I do or nothing that anyone else does seems to make any difference. All kinds of ways of describing that isolation bother different people. For some people who are very philosophical, the way they would frame that question and experience would be in some kind of very sophisticated form of what's called in philosophy a solipsism. That there are maybe other people out there, but we really don't feel each other. I'm simply watching the movie of my life based on my childhood and the givens of my life, and you're watching your movie, and if your movie happens to fit where my movie is, for a time we will have a seemingly very intense experience with each other. But when my movie goes on to a new chapter and it doesn't fit yours, you'll go away. And really, we were never any closer when we were watching the same movie than we were when it was different. And all life is watching a movie. We are only with ourselves and our fantasies, and never really with another person. And our sexuality, wed to our fantasy life and our tastes, can make for a very elaborate and sophisticated movie. but it's still our movie in the end. Life is a masturbation fantasy. Another person agrees to put their hand or their body or their sexuality where we orchestrate it as we do theirs, but no one is really there. It's a deal. We ultimately make deals with each other that we forget we made to give them more enjoyment. Another level of the questioning, which is more at an emotional level rather than philosophical, would be, does anybody really feel me, or do I really feel anyone else, or do we just serve functions for one another? I think two very common fears that express an ultimate feeling of isolation in human relationships are: one, do you love me because of what I do for you, and as long as I do it, you will seemingly feel me and accept me, but when I don't do it anymore, or you think I don't do it anymore, you'll go find somebody else to do it for you, and you never really loved me, you loved what someone does for you. Lots of the paranoias that men have about women and women have about men in a sexist world have to do with that. You don't really love me, but you would love any man or woman that did for you what you want, and when I don't do it for you anymore, you'll forget me fast, even though you say you love my ass now, and you'll love somebody else that does it for you again, which means that it never was me. It was whoever made you feel that. Which means that we never bridge the space between persons. Another variation of that, kind of emotional doubt about isolation is, you love me when I fit a stereotype, but when I get a little gray, or my weight changes a little bit, or my breasts aren't as high as they were when I was 20, when somehow I break whatever the magic picture is, you'll lose your love for me. Or a counterpart of that is a kind of developmental thing, that there was a time in our lives when we connected, when I was of relevance to you. But when that time passes, you won't feel me, which means that you never did. Because if you did, it should last. So that somehow in those seemingly sexist based questions, we're trying to articulate the problem of isolation. How can I be felt, and once felt, why would I not always be felt? Because when we are felt at the level of total surrender, we are always felt. And when we give in a total vulnerable place with somebody we love, we register a feeling in them that says it should always be there. It is a feeling that can't be forgotten, that doesn't go away, that feels like an always feeling. And a little bit more about that later in the lecture. So if it isn't always, was it ever? And with those ways of framing it. Now, we add to those feelings of family isolation, that we never really felt our families, and all our connection with them is what we did together. And the later questions that come from our first non-relationships about what relationship is, we add to that other kinds of isolation which deepen that feeling for us. One is the isolation of one's neurosis, which not all of us have, but sure as hell many of us have got quirks at least. The power of the quirks of the bind that we don't resolve with our families, the places where we are good little boys or good little girls to the bottom, in spite of what we need and what we really feel, the places where we feel always guilty, the places, as we talked about last week, where we stop in relationships because we were not allowed to go on, or were raised in atmospheres where people did not work out conflicts beyond that point. The places where we get weird and crazy and neurotic, in time, encapsulate us, along with the patterns of our lives and just the ways that we are, so that the awareness of one's neurosis and the limitations of it in time comes to be a painfully self-conscious knowing, and beyond it, from the years of its compulsive power, a sensing that it's bigger than anything that happens to us, and bigger than any relationship we've had. Nothing has the power to break the things that we don't neurotically understand. That's the way that many of us feel. And the sense of that can make us very desperate. Not only knowing, as some people that I've known, that not only have I destroyed everything that's come into my life, but I can't foresee anything coming into my life that I wouldn't destroy. It's just a matter of time until I would do my number on anybody so that no one can stay with me, so that I'm alone. Added to that neurotic question for many of us is the problem of chronic depression. If we have put away, as many of us have for years, angers out of our disappointments and frustrations, hurts, betrayals that we've never worked out, and we lack a self-confidence and sense of rights that would let us keep that anger where it belongs with those people that have hurt and disappointed us, the anger settles in time as a depression. Depression, like neurosis, surrounds us, becomes a very powerful thing, and the way that our days feel like to us really have to do with feeling depressed most of the time and feeling happy when we're less depressed. And that feels like happiness to most of us. So that we don't, we really think that feeling better is being less depressed. So that the depression, whether we're conscious of it or not, is really something within which we live. And when it has the power of many unworked out rages, it is, like neurosis, bigger than our life, in the sense that almost anything that happens to us cannot alter the depression, maybe it will affect it momentarily, but the depression will do it in. It will wear it down. It will overtake it. It will devour it. So that we are isolated, like Pfeiffer's characters, inside our depressions, our chronic, low-grade depressions. There is also an isolation that is not necessarily the fruit of these several isolations. It's sometimes experienced by people when they're very young as a realization about life, or it may come as a consequence of a lot of disappointments in fantasy and dream denials of the lack of feeling that they have from other people and sense other people have about them. And that is a kind of existential isolation where beyond people feeling me or not feeling me, and beyond my projection of my ideal friend or brother or mother or father in my fantasies about God, beyond that, I sense that not only is there no one out there that cares, God or person, but that I am surrounded by an ultimate void. It is empty between the other person and me. And that emptiness is bottomless. It is not bridgeable. And with it, there is no sense to any action ultimately that connects either one of us. So that the bridges of words that I build to you mean nothing. And I feel not only emptiness and void, but a sense of meaninglessness, not only about our traffickings with each other in any ultimate sense, but that they're not only about what has come up to now, but anything I might do. Anything I do is ultimately meaningless. It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't have any significance. It doesn't register anywhere. And my feelings are not good judges of that because they're transient. And much more the feeling that seems stronger is the sense of emptiness or void, that I can't feel anything, and the terror that goes with that. And in time, that isolates me in the same way. Because again, there is nothing that happens in the normal dealings between persons that is able to bridge that sense of emptiness. So the void destroys any sense that I'm connected to anything, and I feel alone with myself. And am confronted then with Camus' problem that I either kill myself or figure out the best way to amuse myself until I die. I create meaning to entertain myself. I create the illusions of love to deal with my despair and meet some of my needs, but ultimately I know that I am writing a story, that the meaning or sense to my relationships is not essential or intrinsic. There really is nothing there in an ultimate sense. We pretend with each other for mutual advantage. Now, there are some positive forms of isolation. One of them is the isolation that strong persons feel. If you have been in your life without family and without a love that has touched you and let you know that someone is there and is for you, you have no choice if you free yourself of neurosis, and if you have reasonably growth-oriented or creativity-oriented values, you find yourself taking your unlived passion, sexuality, and frustrated aggressiveness, and if you have a lot of horsepower, as many persons do, that feel the isolation of individuality, you put an enormous force on a daily basis behind your self-development, and in time make yourself a very large person, talent-wise, power-wise, resources-wise, skill-wise, success-wise. You have a lot of leverage and a lot of power. And the refinement of your taste and individuality that goes with that project of self-development in time becomes a source of isolation itself. Not only have I become such a rare bird who can feel me, who can I make a connection with on sympathetic, compatible terms, not only that, but my own self-experience is more powerful and more interesting than what I have with another person. Almost anybody. I'd rather be by myself than waste my time taking care of other people's feelings, assuaging their hurts, paying off with their tantrums for my withdrawals after the pleasure of the honeymoons of early friendships and loves, that the minute the other person senses I'm more than they are, they get crazy, wiggy, jealous, critical, have to knock me down a peg, and I have to try to get myself out of those relationships while I'm bleeding, sparing their feelings. It's not fucking worth it. I'd rather stay home and live with my loneliness, isolation. I'll go out once in a while when I get too crazy, when I can't make it with my magazines and escape and home movies and whatever it is that I'm using to turn myself on and give myself the illusions and fantasy escape satisfactions of relationship. I'll go out and try to do it with somebody, but when I do, I know what it's going to be before I do it. I'll do it because I have to do it, and after it's done, I'll regret doing it because I knew what it was going to be. And yet I go nuts living alone. But all that does is make me work more and more with my own individuality, appreciate it, and yet that isolates me. It's bigger than life. My sense of myself, my valuing of myself, my knowledge that almost anything isn't as good as my experience of myself, leaves me, again, very much alone and away from you. Another thing that can be isolating in a positive sense are values, one's values. Often in response to a world that didn't care about you, a family that did not respect your dignity, children stumble onto pride, the protection of their dignity, as a way to build self-value, as a way to feel themselves, so that they pour their hurt and their righteous rage at being abused into building around them at first perhaps a porous skin of positive pride, but with more time and more hurt, the building of that skin gets away from you. And if you have asserted it enough times as a silent friend in human conflict, it gets to be a lot thicker than you know, until the protection of your dignity and your pride, which was and is your best friend, is now another barrier to you feeling another person and they feeling you. You are imprisoned with your dignity and within it, but by it. And it is very hard for any experience to be strong enough to affect you at the deepest level. You may be a kind person, a loving person, a generous person, but you can't be touched deeply, or if you are, you find it impossible to express totally openly the love and feeling and touching back. So that people seem at a distance to you. You may love the world and love humanity, but feel distant from them and know that they're distant from you. You have friends, but no one who understands and accepts you fully, because you can never share yourself that deeply, because your dignity prevents you from it, and the pleasures of it make it not necessary at a sort of survival level, because you always have your pride. And something, and I don't mean here pride in a posturing image sense. I mean pride in a positive but hurtful self-aware sense. So that this kind of a person can never be unself-conscious. I am always aware of my dignity in a self-conscious sense, so that I can never be carried by experience, namely, I never know what it is to be other than myself. I can appreciate you, but I'm not ultimately influenced by you. Now, regardless of what your experience of isolation is, or combination of those as well as others that I try to sort of briefly talk about, if you get a couple, three of those going together for yourself, a family experience, a kind of existential feeling of void or cynicism or lack of feeling, the protection of a pride, a sense of neurosis, the isolation of depression, you get enough of those things going, and you are really within yourself. Then at some place, another kind of isolation begins to dawn on you, which is the isolation of simply how you've lived for 30 or 40 or 50 years, because it strikes people at different places. And it is a sensing from the amount of isolation that they've been in, from it the projection of the isolation that they will be in, and from a familiarity with myself and my patterns and my changes up to now, that I start to sense the unknown doors that I felt in my adolescence or my 20s, the unknown doors that I could say, I don't really know what I'm going to be in 20 years, that would generate a kind of excitement about life and speak to one's boredom and the sense of days passing is the same. I start to sense that there aren't any more unknown doors, and that even if my life is positive, if I feel good about it, I nonetheless know pretty much where I'm going, and that drives me crazy. I know pretty much what I'm going to be. I could see myself going this way and that way. There's a certain range, but I know what the range is. And part of the reason that I know that range is that I know in my isolation that the only factors influencing me are me. And that nothing is going to come into play that's strong enough to move me off my patterns, my values, my development, not my neurosis, to put me in a place that I could not have anticipated. And that isolation we variously experience as a positive thing, a sense of self-familiarity that I can inform, and that I can inform myself with and affirm myself with. Namely, I can accept that, and I like knowing what I am and where I'm going. And when we're down, it makes us suicidally desperate because we feel impotent to help ourselves be any different than we've been, and we feel that we know there are no influences that we will allow to come in that will make that any different. And that drives me crazy if I'm in a bad mood or at a time in my life when I can't accept myself or I hate myself. That sense of isolation is unbearable to me, and may be one of the major things that drives people of that age into psychotherapy. People who would not otherwise be there may seek another person's influence even though they despair of it, because it's the only thing I think I can do, or that I know to do, even though I despair of it working in the face of what it is that I'm feeling. This is the last place to go for my life to not be the same. Now, hardly any human relationship can affect those kinds of powerful isolations. Surrendered, committed, totally vulnerable love can reach across those spaces, all of them. And at certain times in loving therapies and loving friendships where total vulnerability and total trust takes place, that can happen too. Things happen in those kinds of relationships that not only feel directly, but tell us by their fruits that we have irrevocably felt and been felt by another person and are a different person for that experience. We know it directly, and we can see the signs of it. In a totally committed love, like we talked about last week, the axis of one's life experience changes from one's identity to a space somewhere between and around you and the other person. It is not two separate persons negotiating events between themselves which have meaning, which touch them. It is the surrender of identity, not in the sense of renouncement, but making it a premise that allows the energies of one's personality to meet the energies of someone else's and to be carried by a different wind. And the way that one experiences that directly is that the flow of whims, the flow of inspirations, the flow of things you think to do are different in content, qualitatively, and sometimes in terms of intensity from the flow of whims you would have from your identity experience alone out of relationship and out of your isolation. The whims are different, and you know that. They come from more than you. And that is part of what gives you an incredibly deep sensing of the other person, because their very heartbeat, their whim, their decision of what to do instinctively, not off their ideas, not off their self-control, not off their values, not off of what's going to save their ass or butter their bread, but the very instinct in them is inviting you in to share it at that level, and you somehow sense that you share theirs. It's informed, as we talked about last week, in retrospect and sometimes directly in experience by their wisdom about you and your wisdom about them, adding to this source of whim and inspiration or mutual development that is more than the sum of the parts. The wisdom that is more than what both people would have known in isolation, because they can now know about each other and be known beyond their own self-knowledges. Imagination is opened up in this mutually shared and aroused wind, because the passions of both persons are more intense, because they are fed by ambivalences which, if left to the individual persons, would be in check, but in the scramble of what deep relationship or deep therapy is, those energies are freed not only individually but mutually, so that more energy is afoot to inform taste, passion, inspiration, the feeling that you can do something, so that the range of what both people feel they want to do and the feeling with which they can do it is wide open and beyond what each person has ever known. There is a great excitement in that and an enormous fear, which I'll talk about in a few moments. The feeling that I can do anything, the feeling that I am beyond the limitations that my self-hatred and the expectations that other people have placed on me and that I've accepted. I'm way out beyond what I know of myself, but I know that this is me, but I know that what I know of myself is so because you know me. And the same for you. This is different from dependency, because in dependency I feel that elation but with constant anxiety, because we have both lost ourselves to the power of the needs that throw us together, animated by a neurotic surrender. And the whims cycle with terrible depression, and somehow we don't get anywhere even though our relationship is glorious and our life away from each other is worn down and not helped. When there is not dependency, when people can bear the force of the relationship, I not only feel myself as separate from you, feeling the whims that are ultimately affected by you, so that I feel you with me. I am forever different for it. And I know you're forever different for knowing me. I know that as a feeling and an experience, but I also know that you go on while I go on, but at times in my weariness, my depression and self-doubt, I fear for myself. And it's another reason that the relationship is so heartening and encouraging and confidence-making for me, that even when I'm down or I'm so caught up in what it is that I've done, maybe I'm down for positive reasons. I've blown myself out creatively because I'm so inspired, and I'm in a post-creative blowout depression where I don't even have any energy to feel my self-value, and I fall in a funk. But somehow what helps me at that time is that I can feel you. That even if you're not with me physically, I know that you're going on somewhere because we are together. And that sense of the other person going on has many implications in it. It means that I can bring the force of me and you can hold. You don't get swallowed up in me. I don't devour you, which is what dependency is, and is a problem that strong people have in giving relationships, whether another person can hold. But if they can, there's something enormously encouraging about that. That I don't have to consciously take care of myself all the time. I can be more reckless with myself, my creativity, my passion, my feeling, my mind, because I don't have to watch out for you. And not only that, the fact that you're going on will remind me that I go on when I'm worn out from this craziness that we live together, that is so positive, so impossibly difficult, but so important and so life-making and building if the people can separately hold their identities. We experience that awareness of the other person going on in many ways, not only as a sensing that I'm aware of you, but also sometimes in very concrete ways. We get ESP things about each other. We know what you're doing. I know that you're thinking about me. And that's without playing with it, without doing the things that neurotic mothers who devour their children do with it, that evil people do with those kinds of bonds when they manipulate them, where I'm going to make you think about me, where I'm going to cause you to do something because I know you're with me, and even if you're 3,000 miles away, I can make you bleed or hurt for me if I want to. Not feeling the other person in that sense, but simply spontaneous experiences that tell us all the time in sensing ways and in very concrete ways that I'm connected with another person, and that is the answer to my feeling of isolation. I know I'm not alone. I know I'm not alone because I'm a different person for knowing you. You're a different person for knowing me. I know my life would not be the same had it not been for that. I know that I carry some of your strength with me. I am more than my self-confidence. I am more than the tasks in life I've mastered. I am more than my talent. I meet my life with myself, my experience, what I've learned from it, and your faith, your love, and your acceptance and valuing of me. Next week, much more about acceptance, but just to bring that into play. I meet my life with all of that, and that allows me to do more. I can do more than if I was by myself. And as a consequence, I am more, which makes my confidence larger, but as I said last week, in a way that doesn't cheat me of it. Psychotherapy and non-romantic friendships that are totally vulnerable and valuing can also sow that. Loving therapists and friends are able to give us the feeling that they are with us, as distinct from experiences of mutual passion. That presence has the affirming going on. I know they're with me. I know they stand with me in my livings and choosings. I know I'm different for that. I may not have as an addition the mutuality of their being out of control with me.